Good morning, everyone. A pleasure to have you back in my YouTube channel. This proposal today, it's a mini short session about translanguaging. I don't know if it's your case, it is mine. In our school, international schools, we do have on a daily basis students arriving, and sometimes, or many times actually, some of them are English language learners, or their level of the language spoken in school is very low because they come from other countries, from other cultures, and we just need to imagine how hard is it for them not only to adapt to a new culture, a new school, a new country, but in addition to that, to try to make friends that speak a language that they don't feel comfortable with. So translanguaging is not only a strategy that can be used in lessons, but it's also a way to approach EAL students or any language learner from any language from a different perspective. So before we start, two sources that I will be taking ideas from, the Bell Foundation in terms of their definition of translanguaging, and Crisfield Educational Consulting from a very experienced educator in language development over in Crisfield. So these are two of the sources, and some others will come along the presentation. The first thing that we need to look at is the idea of cognitive development. And Piaget came up with a cognitive development theory that establishes the EAL phases in relation to the cognitive development of each one of the students. So on the right hand side, what you can see, it's the average time it takes to reach certain levels of language development. So it could take between 6 months to a year to be beginner in English with limited literacy background, or beginner in any language, let's say. From 1 to 2 years to have an emerging level. From 2 to 5 years to have a developing language level. And finally, 5 or more years to consolidate the level of a language. Most of the time, when parents send their kids to international schools or bilingual schools, they think that the process of learning a language will take a couple of months. But it's important for us to clarify since the beginning that learning a language is a long journey. And of course, it will all depend on the context of the student, if the student is immersed in that language. But most of the time what happens is that students are using a language in school, but as soon as they go back home, they speak with their parents in another language, or they watch TV in another language, or they read in another language. So it depends on the context. It will take more or less to go through the development of the language. And Haynes and Ellis came up with a stage of language acquisition, and you have them there lined up from reproduction to early production to speech emergence, intermediate fluency, and advanced fluency. So it's important, by showing these two sources, what I wanted to insist is on the fact that learning a language is not something that is done quickly. It goes through levels, it goes through phases, if you teach the MYP. It goes through different levels of development. And it's important that we place the students at the right level with the correct level of challenge and have expectations or language expectations adapted to their level of fluency. Once we have that clear in our mind, and if we look at some of the teaching and assessment strategies for differentiation, one of them is, and there's an arrow in there, bilingual support. With the support we can provide to students for them to develop their knowledge in any single subject. So what is it translanguaging? The Bell Foundation has this definition. Translanguaging are the practices that allow and encourage EAL learners to use their full linguistic repertoire, which means to being able to use their language knowledge in any language to develop the target language. And that is important. Baker comes up with another definition, which is the process of making sense, meaning, experiences, gaining understanding and knowledge through the use of 2 or more languages. Because at the end, we use the word bilingual, but we can probably use the word multilingual, isn't it? So it's important that we can use, and that's the idea of translanguaging, the use of the mother tongue in order to learn or to develop the skills in the target language. How can we do these things? How can we propose translanguaging in classroom? So how can we use systematically those two languages inside the same lesson? And I will be using the words input and output. And those words come from Owen Crisfeld. The idea of using the input in one language, and so the output or the product of the lesson is in the target language. So what do we mean by successful bilingualism? There is this threshold theory that divides the level of bilingualism, if you say, in 3 floors of a house. Or instead of using the 3 floors of a house, you can use a ladder. Yeah. So basically it says that on the first floor, we have limited bilinguals. So those limited bilinguals are those students that they are not proficient in any of the languages. And they are in the process of learning at a very low level those languages. In the second floor, we will have less balanced bilinguals. The ones that they have adequate competence in the target language. Yeah. And finally, on the top floor, we have the balanced bilinguals. So students that they have the same level of competence in both languages, in the mother tongue and in the target language. Now, this is where cognitive advantages come. Because the way in which the brain works, it's in a more flexible way. So when students are able to have the sounds of 2 different languages, it will definitely help them to develop their knowledge and their skills in other languages. What happens? What are the reasons for students not to reach that top floor? Because this is basically the target that we have in bilingual schools in particular. So there are many reasons. We can have academic gaps. We can have subject-specific gaps that makes that the knowledge of the students is not good enough to reach that top level. We can have the personal context of the students, and I'm not going to go through learning difficulties, but also the contextualize the family context, the personal context in the cultural context. We can also have language barriers, and this is what happens with EAL students. For example, I don't know if your school does CAT4 entry tests to better understand the level of the students and to accept them or to place them in the right level and the right year group. We need to take into consideration that most of the time those CAT4 tests or that benchmark test measure the verbal cognitive of the students. And if the student is an EAL, we need to be careful not to analyze the results of the verbal cognitive test as a whole. But we can also have a focus on something else at the topic. So we can have a student who is really focusing on learning a language, and then the topic and the content of a specific subject is not its priority right now. So when we assess those students, because we teach, I don't know, mathematics, sciences, history, geography, language, heavy subjects, we need to take into consideration the level of language of that particular student, because maybe he's focusing on understanding the language and not understanding the topic of the subject. So how can we help? How can we help those EAL students in our classroom? Many things that you probably already do, using glossaries, vocabulary lists, put in place group discussion when you have students from the same mother tongue discussing. Allow them to do some online research on their own. You can have translating routines in classroom and translating into the target language and the mother tongue, the main classroom routines, the icebreakers. You can use contextualized learning. You can allow students to draft work in their mother tongue, or you can use translanguaging. For example, and some ideas coming from Owen Educational Consultancy, you can present the work in the target language, let's say in English, and allow students to do research in their mother tongue about the work that they have to do, gather ideas, gather opinions, and expect them to produce an outcome in the target language. Of course, the outcome will be limited, but that can be done. You can also present a text in English, in the mother tongue, and give them a similar text with the same ideas, with the same topics in their target language. And ask them to compare both texts and create some kind of a mind map with the main ideas are there. The mind map must be produced in the target language, of course. Or you can also give them a mother tongue text, ask them to read it, and give them as well a mind map of that text with the main ideas in the target language. Let's say be the text in French and the mind map in English. And ask them to use the mind map, the main ideas, to produce a little paragraph explaining the text. Some ideas which I hope you found useful and you're ready to implement. And if it's the case, as always, please make a comment on the chat so we can all share best practice. Thank you for your time. Bye.